Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up later, we'll profile artist Les Skoropat. But first, Matt Olien gets a chance to talk with Fargo poet Tim Murphy.
And I'm happy to be here with longtime friend of Prairie Public and Fargo poet Tim Murphy, and his newest book of poems is Devotion. Tim works very fast. He's had a lot of books over the years of poetry, and Tim, thanks for being here.
Well, it's great to be with you again, Matt. I think it's 16 years since I did my first show with you.
Yes, I think so. So tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, where you're from, how you became a poet.
Well, I graduated from Moorhead High in 1968, and I went to Yale. My mother was a Shakespearean actress, and my father, in his earlier years, an English teacher. And I grew up on poetry. Mother read me my first Shakespearean play when I was 5, and I saw the Royal Canadian Shakespeare Company perform the first play I saw when I was 10. So I just grew up with poetry. At Yale, I had the great good fortune of being taken under the wing by the great Robert Penn Warren, who gave me a 3-year tutorial.
Wrote All the King's Men.
Right. All the King's Men, won 2 Pulitzer Prizes in poetry and 1 in fiction. I memorized 30,000 lines of poetry for Warren, basically the English canon, from the Beowulf and Anglo-Saxon up through modern poetry. So, I mean, there was never any question that I would end up being a poet.
And let's talk about your new book, Devotions. We were chatting about this at your home recently, and how did this come about?
Well, for 40 years, I was what I would characterize as a heresiarch, meaning an arch heretic. I was completely inimical to Christianity. And then through a rather paranormal means, in 2005, the Holy Spirit just took over my life and I became a daily Mass Catholic. This book is a collection of the devotional poems for about the first 7 years that I were a Catholic. It's a big book, it's 160 pages, but it ends in 2014. If I were to recompile the book today, it would be 100 pages longer. And it's like Hunter's Log, which we discussed here. It is a selected poems on a single theme. That on hunting, this on faith.
And some of the poems are kind of spiritual devotions, others have to do with daily life. Kind of tell me about the combination of those things and how they come to you, how you write your poetry.
Well, the first year that I returned to the church, the writing was pretty bad. And then I figured out that I could write about farming and hunting and climbing and sailing with a completely new perspective. My life partner, Alan Sullivan, was very suspicious at first, but once I had figured out how to do that, he proudly called me his born-again poet.
And how do the poems come to you? Sometimes I know you tell me they come in dreams a little bit, but you work pretty fast, don't you?
Yeah, I've just had what academics call an annus mirabilis, a miracle year in Latin. I wrote 3.5 books, and they're substantial books. Now, by contrast, my first book took 25 years to write. But at this stage, meter and rhyme, for me, is just like rolling out of bed. And I just have so much more life experience than I had when I was in my 20s. And it is a rich experience. It's an outdoors experience. I mean, my strongest venues are the North Woods of Minnesota, where the Boy Scout poems come from, the Red River Valley and the High Plains, where the farming poems come from, and all of the Rockies, from Colorado up through the Alaska Range, which Alan and I spent 2 decades exploring when I was young enough to do it.
And what's the reaction to your poems? I know you've been published for years, and reaction to this book as well, and it must be nice to see some critical evaluation come back at times.
Yeah, I'm hoping that NDSU Press in 3 or 4 years, when they get through their enormous backlog with me, they have 3 double volumes that they need to publish, and they're going to publish a second volume of Hunter's Log, that they will put together a book of critical commentary on me. I've just seen 2 advanced reviews of devotions this week from 2 of the best women poets in the United States. And the critical reaction is invariably good.
Good. Can someone make a living as a poet anymore? I mean,
Oh,
you
no.
worked, I know you worked.
No
you told me
way.
you worked in financial services, and
Robert Frost didn't make a living as a poet. He made his living receiving faculty salaries at Amherst, the University of Michigan, etc. And he wisely invested his earnings in orange groves in Florida, which later became Fort Lauderdale. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, nobody knows it. It was a dark secret, and my great master and mentor, Richard Wilbur, who is now 95, and who was very close to Frost when he was in his 20s, told me that dark secret.
Interesting. Well, could you read a few? We're going to have a couple readings here, but a couple poems for us.
Sure. Let's talk about dream poems.
Okay.
When you're drinking hard, you just don't remember your dreams. But for the last 12 years, my dream life has become almost as real to me as my waking life. And when I rejoined the church, I found out that a boyhood friend, Father Frank Miller, whom I knew through agriculture, was serving as the priest out at St. Joseph's in Castleton. So Frank became my confessor and spiritual advisor. And he had a little mission church 20 miles west of Castleton in Buffalo. And one night when we had a terrible blizzard, I had this dream. Mission Church. I dream that you set forth for Buffalo just as the blizzard winds begin to blow. A patch of black ice and a crosswind pitch your little Chevy nose down in the ditch. The nearest farm is only half a mile, but you lie down halfway to sleep a while. When the day yawns, you waken stiff but warm, unscathed by that ferocity of storm whose wind chills fell to 55 below. The cornice where you curled, waiting your toe, no ninth circle, prey to traitorous weather, that snowflake on your cassock, Gabriel's feather. So this dream came to me, and I got up the next morning and I just typed it out.
Wonderful.
And thank God that didn't happen to Father Frank. He wouldn't have survived that night in the ditch
No.
on Cass County number 4 or
No.
whatever it is. I think that maybe the best poem in here is Agape. And this is a dream that came to me 3 times. Agape is the classical Greek word for the love of man for God, the love of God for man, as opposed to eros, which is romantic or sexual love. And I got this dream on May 2nd, 2005. I had only returned to the church 2 months before, and it was the night that John Paul died. And the dream came, and I turned on public radio and I heard the bells of St. Peter's, and I knew very well what had happened. And the dream came back 4 times, and the 4th time it came back, Pope Benedict was reading the Riot Act to the U.S. Council of Bishops over the clerical abuse issue. And I knew that I watched that, and I went to sleep, and the dream came back, and it was identical every time, but this time it came back as 16 lines of rhymed iambic pentameter, which I remembered verbatim when I woke up. You know, I just ran to my keyboard and typed it out. Agape. This originally appeared in poetry. The night you died, I dreamed you came to camp to hear confession from an Eagle Scout, tortured by 40 years of sin and doubt. You whispered vespers by a hissing lamp. Handlers, allowing you to hike with me, followed us to the Bad Axe waterfront. Down a fire break, this camper used to hunt. Through all I said, you suffered silently. I blamed the authors of my disbelief. St. Paul, who would have found my love obscene. The Jesuit who raped me as a teen. The altar boy when I was 6. The grief of a child chucked from Eden, left for dead by Peter's church and all the choirs above. In a thick Polish accent, choked with love, Te Dominus amat, was all you said.
Wonderful. How many poems have you written in your life, Tim, do you think?
Well, I've got 835 pages, but when I'm in epigrammatic mode, there might be 4 on a page, you know, 4 couplets or 4 quatrains. So I have no idea, but it's
probably over 1,000.
Oh, way over 1,000.
Yeah.
And Thomas Hardy wrote 885 pages of poetry, but he's
more known for his novels, of course.
Yeah. Well, these days, a lot of people value his poetry more highly than his novels. I read his novels when I was in high school, but my dad was reciting me Hardy before I was 10. So he is the poet who most influences me of all poets, and I'll pass him this year. But he didn't publish his first book until he was 60, and the reviewer for the Times said, Mr. Hardy should confine himself to the novel and spare us the embarrassment of reading his poetry. Now that has to go down as the worst book review in the history of English literature.
And how many film versions of Tess have there been? A lot. So he did okay. So.
Well, he made himself rich as a novelist, and then late in his 50s, he turned himself entirely to poetry.
I know we do the Poetry Out Loud competition here. We videotape that every year at Bismarck, and you were over at Shanley a couple years ago, and we had some cameras there. How important are things like that for high school kids to be involved in, do you think?
Well, my friend Dana Gioia, who writes the marvelous 3-page introduction to this book, and who was chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, and who has really been instrumental in every book I've published. He started Poetry Out Loud, and I think it's just great. I mean, I did serious declamation and debate. You know, I certainly wasn't equipped to be a jock, but I think it's simply a marvelous program. And in fact, one of my poems is in the workbook. I don't know if any kid has ever chosen it.
Tackled it yet?
Yeah.
What do you got planned next? I mean, I know you have some more books you'd like to publish and books of poems. What's next on the docket?
Keep writing.
After devotions.
Keep writing a poem a day.
Poem a day.
Well, right now I'm on my 12th book, which is entitled Songs and Sonnets, which is the title of John Donne's first book. And it takes balls of brass to title a book Songs and Sonnets. And 90% of the poems in it are sonnets. It's 65 pages long so far. I started it on December 1st, if you can believe that, Matt. So the Poetry Factory is just grinding on 24/7. My immediate goal is to finish that book and then start the next one.
What's your advice to young writers, whether they want to write poems or books or critical evaluations?
Write what you know.
Okay.
And know a lot. You know, I mentioned that I memorized 30,000 lines of poetry. I had everything from Beowulf down to Richard Wilbur by memory. To be a writer is, in my mind, to be deeply learned and to realize that you're just the hind tit on a boar. I mean, in my art, poetry, the tradition begins with the Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumeria, in what is now Baghdad, 3,500 years BC. So poetry's been around for 5,500 years. King David basically invented the lyric between 1,000 and 1,100 BC. So my branch of poetry, the lyric poem, has been around for 3,000 years.
Mm-hmm. Can you read one or two more short ones for us?
Sure.
Before we wrap up, we've got about 3 minutes left here.
Here is a brand new dream poem.
Okay.
Oops, I printed out the wrong poem. So we won't do that. I dreamed about 8 years ago that a Hutterite elder came to my townhouse. And it was such a vivid dream, and I got up and I wrote dream poem. Dressed in black, he wore a Hasidic hat, but no side locks, not of the Hasidim, but a Hutterian. I invited him to cross the threshold of my modest flat. What can I do? Zur Visik want to speak on Schiller, Goethe, Rilke to our boys and disabuse them of romantic noise. We've reason to believe it's you we seek. We make our boys study the Beowulf. Our tongue is old. They dimly understand Anglo-Saxon. And sir, you've sold us land. We ask you, elder, help us cross a gulf between water and sun. Why me, I ask? Goethe and Rilke I would likely praise. We think you know the darkness of these days, and by God's will, you can achieve his task. This was a dream that verged on the absurd. 5 centuries divide me from these Volk who candle chicken eggs for sterile yolk. Fiasco or disaster, choose your word. Yet I admit my grudging admiration for people who preserve their way, who all believe God's word was spoken by St. Paul. They are too few ever to form a nation. Righteously they gaze up, admire the stars. They are the colonists God means for Mars.
Well done. Got about 30 seconds left. If people want a copy of Devotions, when's it available? How can they get it?
It should be published about February 15th. The debut will be at the NDSU Art Gallery, where we're going to haul over my amazing collection of Charlie Becks, and it'll be available at Zambros as always.
Okay.
Or you know, Amazon,
Great.
Anywhere.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks you, Matt.
for coming in.
I have greatly enjoyed this.
Our guest has been Fargo poet Tim Murphy. Stay tuned for more.
Les Skoropat is a multifaceted artist who resides in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. His works include photography, printmaking, fiber arts, and calligraphy, just to name a few. His passion for graphic design has been the root of his employment at Prairie Public since 1975. Here's a chance to get to know a little more about Les Skoropat.
Cars are a great subject for photography or any other kind of artwork because they can stand still, they can move. We all have experiences with them. The kinds of design that's gone into cars is incredibly varied. The possibilities are really endless with that kind of about photography. I started at Prairie Public right out of college, and I've been working at Prairie Public ever since then. I was hired basically as an art director, graphic designer at Prairie Public, working in marketing essentially, and that's still what I do. I do primarily print design. I've done some work with set design and those sorts of things, but most of what I do is promotional graphics of one sort or another, our monthly program guide magazine, advertising, packaging for our video products. I like to tell people that, you know, I haven't had just one job. Every time the technology shifts, I get a new job because I get to learn new techniques and new styles, new ways of making ideas happen. I grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota, born on Flag Day. I'd been doing something with art ever since I could hold a pencil. My dad worked as an accountant. He'd bring home 3H pencils, you know, the really hard ones, and he worked for a newspaper, so he'd bring home newsprint. So I had these really hard pencils on this really soft paper, and I had to figure out how to draw on them. So from a very young age, I developed a light touch with drawing. So that was really my first exposure to art. And in high school, I took some art classes, of course. I was also on the yearbook staff, which gave me a chance to start learning about photography, and spent a lot of time on the sidelines of football fields, taking photos of athletes coming at me with a double lens reflex camera, and they would go this way, and I would have to go that way to catch them. And so I kind of learned how cameras and lenses and light worked, which I continue to this day in photography. Like a lot of kids my age, at that time I was interested in the design of cars and what was done with them. The history of car design is something else that I find particularly interesting, to see what's actually been done with the basic form of, you know, 4 wheels and a seat. I could photograph the cars and document, you know, here is a 57 Chevy and there is a 62 Studebaker, or whatever it is. Or I could go to a different level and be working with the colors and textures and shapes, which is what I prefer to do with photography with respect to cars. There's also a number of things you can do just studying the various kinds of textures and reflections and colors that you see on any given car. I could easily spend dozens of frames just photograph one single car. I'm not really taking a photo of the car itself, but I'm photographing what I see around the car, or the forms and the shapes that the car creates, or its relationship to its space, reflecting the sky. That's really part of the joy of looking at art. To see art, or to see the world in a different way through art, and to see what artists do with it. I think some of the most interesting feedback I've gotten recently was with a series of car photographs I did, in which I worked with the idea of the reflection that's on the surface of the car. When you have a reflection, of course, things are backwards or upside down. So I literally turned the photographs upside down to see what they would look like, and it would turn this photograph of a car into a landscape, essentially, with kind of these automotive trimmings around the horizon. One of my favorites that I've done recently is the Fargo Theater reflected in the hood of a Buick. What I like about it is kind of the ambiguity of the hood ornament on the car appearing in the horizon of the sky, and trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a sun, it looks like a star, as well as just the icon of the Fargo Theater being part of the image. Another photograph that I like, very simple one, of the back window of happened to be a 51 Chevy, but the owner had put the words "Good night, Irene" on the back windshield of this car, and then reflected in the window was some beautiful clouds that particular day. In talking with the owner, I found out that that was the kind of car he had when he was courting his wife. in the 50s and when that song, Goodnight Irene, was popular. So that was why he did that. But for me, it was significant too, because my mother, who happened to be named Irene, had passed away about a year before that. So to me, it was kind of an expression of you know, who she was and how she relates to my photography.
Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse for this week. But as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, and by the members of Prairie Public.